Good evening, welcome to This Week in Turkey. The Istanbul 27th Heavy Penal Court ruled on Tuesday that 5 Daily Cumhuriyet journalists will continue to remain in prison pending trial on terrorism-related charges.
The Istanbul 27th Heavy Penal Court ruled on Tuesday that 5 Daily Cumhuriyet journalists will continue to remain in prison pending trial on terrorism-related charges. During the fourth hearing at the court, a total of 19 suspects, 5 of whom are currently in jail, were on trial to face terrorism charges. 2 of the journalists, the Daily former editor-in-chief Can Dündar and İlhan Taner, are in exile. The court ruled that 5 defendants, including Cumhuriyet editor-in-chief Murat Sabuncu, reporter Ahmet Şık, CEO Akın Atalay, and accounting employee Emre İper will remain in prison. They are charged with supporting the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party (PKK), Gülen movement (FETÖ), and the outlawed Revolutionary People's Liberation Party Front (DHKPC). Prison sentences requested by the state prosecutor ranged from 7.5 years to 43 years. The next hearing will be held on December 25 and 26. On the same day, the Istanbul 23rd High Criminal Court ordered the release of the last 2 arrested defendants in the case into the now closed Daily Özgür Gündem, in which they are being tried on terrorism charges. After spending 301 days in prison, the Daily's license holder Kemal Sancılı and its acting news editor İnan Kızılkaya were released during the 5th hearing, in which they are being tried along with 7 others on charges of targeting the unity of the state and being a member of a terrorist organization. The indictment says that the closed-down Daily had engaged in terrorist propaganda by publishing the opinions of the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party (PKK).
Prominent civil society figure and businessman Osman Kavala has been arrested following 14 days in detention.
The Istanbul 27th Heavy Penal Court ruled on Tuesday that 5 Daily Cumhuriyet journalists will continue to remain in prison pending trial on terrorism-related charges. During the 4th hearing at the court, a total of 19 suspects, 5 of whom are currently in jail, were on trial to face terrorism charges. 2 of the journalists, the Daily former editor-in-chief Can Dündar and İlhan Taner, are in exile. The court ruled that 5 defendants, including Cumhuriyet editor-in-chief Murat Sabuncu, reporter Ahmet Şık, CEO Akın Atalay, and accounting employee Emre İper will remain in prison. They are charged with supporting the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party (PKK), Gülen movement (FETÖ), and the outlawed Revolutionary People's Liberation Party Front (DHKPC). Prison sentences requested by the state prosecutor ranged from 7.5 years to 43 years. The next hearing will be held on December 25 and 26. On the same day, the Istanbul 23rd High Criminal Court ordered the release of the last 2 arrested defendants in the case into the now closed Daily Özgür Gündem, in which they are being tried on terrorism charges. After spending 301 days in prison, the Daily's license holder Kemal Sancılı and its acting news editor İnan Kızılkaya were released during the 5th hearing, in which they are being tried along with 7 others on charges of targeting the unity of the state and being a member of a terrorist organization. The indictment says that the closed-down Daily had engaged in terrorist propaganda by publishing the opinions of the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party (PKK).
Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım is set to visit the US on November 7th amid an ongoing visa dispute between the 2 countries.
Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım is set to visit the US on November 7th amid an ongoing visa dispute between the 2 countries. Yıldırım's visit is expected to last for 4 days until November 11th. The visa dispute was sparked on October 8th when the US Embassy in Ankara announced the suspension of non-immigrant visa services to Turkish nationals following the arrest of a local employee working at the US consulate in Istanbul named Metin Topuz. Concerning the tense relations between Turkey and the US, the Rıza Zarrab case and the extradition of Fethullah Gülen remain key topics. Just a week before Rıza Zarrab is set to go on trial, his lawyers have given every indication that he may be prepared to plead guilty. According to the New York Times, in the court papers filed on Monday, the lawyers for Mr. Zarrab's co-defendant, a Turkish bank executive named Mehmet Hakan Atilla, wrote that Mr. Zarrab has essentially not participated in the case since September, and it seemed likely that Mr. Atilla will be the only defendant appearing at trial. On the other hand, there has been another remarkable development concerning the claims about the deals made between American and Turkish officials with the aim of discrediting Fethullah Gülen. According to an exclusive article published by the New York Times and Reuters, former CIA Director James Woolsey pitched a $10 million contract to two Turkish businessmen in order to help discredit Fethullah Gülen while Woolsey was an advisor to Donald Trump's election campaign. On September 20, 2016, Woolsey met with businessmen Ekim Alptekin and Sezgin Baran Korkmaz over lunch at the Peninsula Hotel in New York, the article claimed. Alptekin had already agreed through one of his companies to a $600,000 contract with the consulting firm of Michael Flynn to conduct research on Gülen. The deal with Flynn is now being investigated by Special Counsel Robert Mueller as part of his wider probe into whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russians who have allegedly tried to interfere in the 2016 US presidential election.
Following the intensifying tension in the Kurdish region of Iraq, the Kurdistan Regional Government President, Masoud Barzani, has announced his resignation.
Following the intensifying tension in the Kurdish region of Iraq, the Kurdistan Regional Government President Masoud Barzani announced his resignation. Mr. Barzani stated that as of November 1st, he would step down and no longer hold position as the president of regional government. The independence referendum, which has strongly supported by President Barzani, had backfired and triggered a regional crisis with the Iraqi government troops taking control of Kurdish-held oil-rich areas including Kirkuk. On Sunday, Mr. Barzani's decision to step down was voted and accepted at the Kurdish Regional Parliament with a majority of 70 votes against 23. I am the same Masoud Barzani. I am a Peshmerga and will continue to help my people in their struggle for independence, Mr. Barzani stated in his letter to the regional parliament. Following the meeting, the parliament was stormed by armed protesters. According to BBC, the details of the situation remain unclear. However, some witnesses report seeing protesters with clubs and some gunshots have also been heard. Mr. Barzani's decision to resign has been welcomed by the United States and Britain. In a written statement, the US State Department praised Mr. Barzani's strong leadership and effective fight against ISIS. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan also commented on the issue, stressing the importance of Iraq remaining a federal entity. Meanwhile, as a part of the operation led by the Iraqi government, the control of the Ibrahim Halil border gate was handed over to the central government from the Kurdish regional government. With unfolding developments, President Erdogan noted that, as Turkey, we are leaning toward delivering aid through the central government since we do not regard the Kurdish regional government as our counterpart.
Tonight, we're joined by Aysel Madra, a policy analyst at the Education Reform Initiative, to talk about the current state of the education system in Turkey. Good evening, Ms. Madra. Welcome to This Week in Turkey.
Thank you so much. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yourself?
Fine, thank you.
All right, so before we start speaking further on the current state of the education system in Turkey, let's get to know your organization a bit better. What is the Education Reform Initiative, known also as the ERG, in Turkish, and what does it do?
Yeah, of course. Education Reform Initiative is an independent, non-profit think and do tank. And what we strive for is basically ensuring that every child in Turkey has access to quality education. So to this end, what we do is we basically monitor the educational policies implemented by the National Ministry of Education of Turkey, and to this end we do a lot of monitoring and we do a lot of reporting. But we also commission and conduct independent research projects, again, on the education system in Turkey. And in addition to these, we also do lobbying and outreach activities, again, towards ensuring that children have quality access to education, access to quality education. Mm-hmm. In addition to these, we also we try to develop more innovative and creative solutions as well. For instance, we have a teachers network that tries to support the professional and personal development of teachers, who are one of the main stakeholders of education, obviously.
Can you tell us a bit about the Education Monitoring Report, which is published annually by your organization, the ERG, and it, as the title suggests, monitors education in Turkey. Can you summarize what the report is about for us?
Yeah, of course. So this is a report, that's one of the major reports that we produce every year. And this year, a couple of weeks ago, we published our 10th report, actually. And what we do in this report is basically we evaluate the major developments that transpired during the school education year. So we, as a think tank, we focus from pre-K education, basically. So starting from pre-elementary school up until the end of 12th grade, we monitor the basic developments that actually happened. So we have topics such as access to quality education, finance and governance. We have a chapter on teachers. We look at issues such as school climate and the content of education and everything that basically has to do with education. So this basically is a monitoring report that looks at the year, basically.
This might come as a pretty broad question, but we'll definitely delve into more detail in the following minutes. In light of this year's education monitoring report, in light of its results, how would you summarize the current state of Turkey's education system? Or to be more particular, according to the findings of your report, which areas seem most problematic?
Sure. So, what has happened one of the good things that has happened in the past 10 years is basically that access to education has increased immensely. So this is true for, let's say, early childhood education, but also for higher education as well. In the year 2012 and 13, high school education was made compulsory in Turkey. And since then, we see that actually more kids and more students are in the education system. So that's obviously a positive development, but nevertheless, enrollment is not 100%, which continues to remain a problem. Is my voice okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Nevertheless, we see a lot of variation in the different geographical locations across Turkey. For instance, in southeast Turkey, we see that enrollment rates do actually go down. And also there's a lot of divergences and variations within provinces as well. Another problem that we actually have emphasized in the report is that even though access to education has gone up, there are still the quality of education in Turkey could be improved, especially quality of education in high school. And we can monitor this through the international exams that Turkish high school kids actually take, for instance, the PISA exam or the TIMSS exam, in which this year Turkey has not scored so well, but also in for instance, university entrance placement exams as well.
So let's get to the report a bit and let's talk about it in detail. I've gone over the report and it draws attention to the rise in the number of these things called the community-based institutions that that provide education. Can you explain what this means, what community-based education institutions are, and why we should be worried about the rise in their number in Turkey?
Yeah, of course. So community-based institutions, they're basically part of the early childhood education system. And 2 years ago, they actually entered the statistics. So what we do know is that these community-centered institutions that cater towards the needs, towards the education of pre-primary kids, they're basically operated or organized by the Directorate of Religious Affairs and the municipalities as well. So they're not center-based, but they're community-based, and this has to do with ensuring that more children actually has access to pre-primary education, which, as I have mentioned before, the enrollment rates in Turkey in that specific age group is not very high. So we actually don't know. The problem is that we don't actually have a lot of information in terms of what is going on in these institutions. So, for instance, the ones that are operated by the Directorate of Religious Affairs, we don't know if the kids are taught or sort of handed down some sort of a religious education, which is not in accordance with their pedagogical sort of maturity level and whatnot. So because we do not know what is, we do not have so much information about what is actually going on in these institutions, how they're monitored, if, you know, they are subject to some sort of regulation or not, it is very hard to make assessments about them.
Ms. Madra, your report also finds that inequality is a persistent problem currently in Turkey's education system, and often shows itself in the form of regional inequalities or gender-based inequalities. Can you give us a brief picture of how the education system in Turkey at the moment is struggling with this problem?
So up until almost a month and a half ago, the way that Turkish students were actually placed into higher education was through a standard exam that every student in Turkey actually had to take. And according to the score that you actually take in that exam, which you do at the end of the 8th grade, you were placed into a school. And according to our analysis, we actually see that kids actually who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they get placed into lower quality schools, whereas kids coming from more well-off families who have higher socioeconomic capital, they are somehow placed into better schools, which of course then forces their affects their chances of getting into university, which has an impact on their labor, the outcome of how they're actually going to, what kinds of jobs that they actually get after they graduate from universities. So this actually happens based on socioeconomic background, but we also know that, for instance, kids of certain ethnicities, for instance, Roma kids have lower access to education, and they actually face a lot of discrimination, even if they can somehow go to school. Another issue is, of course, the refugee children, the number of refugees, especially of Syrian background. Students in Turkey has increased tremendously in the last couple of years, and they also are not getting the best quality education that they should.
Perhaps one of the most striking findings of your report is the underperformance of Turkish students, 15-year-olds, in the PISA tests, which is the OECD's program for international student assessment. For our viewers who are not very familiar with the situation, can you summarize what seems to be the main problem here with Turkish students?
So Turkish students, PISA is an international exam that a lot of countries actually participate in. And Turkey has been participating in this exam, which is conducted every 3 years for the past couple of rounds. And what happened this year in the 2015 cycle is that Turkish students actually scored lower than they did in 2012, and even lower than they got lower scores on average than the years before. TIMSS also is an exam that actually focuses on science and math, which 4th graders and 8th take. This is also an international exam that Turkey has been participating in for the past couple of cycles. So what PISA does, for instance, is that it doesn't focus so much on the curriculum, but it assesses how students sort of apply the skills that they learn in school into real-life situations. So it sort of assesses the life skills of Turkish students. And unfortunately, Turkish students did not score so well in board exams, but they did especially worse in PISA, which, as I said, focuses on life skills. So this might actually have to do with the structure of the Turkish education system, is mostly based on standard exams and which leads students to memorize instead of really comprehend and sort of analyze some of the things that they learn in school. One other problematic thing is that if in addition to the low average score that Turkish students got, if you actually analyze the students according to their proficiency levels, we see that a lot of the Turkish kids sort of score on the lower end. They have lower proficiencies, and the percentage of students who get higher, who are sort of placed in the higher proficiency sort of level is very, very low. So this basically implies that Turkish students are not doing so well, especially in math and science, and they do not have the skills to sort of carry into the sort of 21st century and make scientific discoveries and whatnot.
So, Ms. Madra, for the most part of our conversation, we've focused on the negative aspects of the Turkish education system. But last, but definitely not least, I'd like to ask you this. What are some of the positive findings of your report about Turkey's education system?
Yeah, of course. I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning, the access to the enrollment rates have been increasing. So more and more kids have access to education in Turkey, which is very important, obviously. But what needs to be focused on is sort of more what are things that actually have to do with quality of education. So what happens once kids are inside of the school? And the ministry has been taking steps towards, ensuring that the quality of education is going up as well. So, for instance, what they published last year is basically a strategy report to ensure that teachers are sort of to support teacher development, let's put it that way. And it's a very important development because we know that teachers are one of the main stakeholders in education, and they make the most difference because they're the ones who have one-to-one contact with students. So it's a positive development, for instance, that the ministry is sort of paying attention to this. But of course, it is important how this sort of strategic plan is going to be implemented in the long run.
Ms. Madra, thank you very much for sharing your evaluations with us tonight and being with us through Skype here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll continue with our next news video, which is again on the current state of the education system in Turkey.
Education Reform Initiative, an Istanbul-based think tank focusing on issues related to the education system in Turkey, has published the 2017 edition, its annual education monitoring report last month. The report presents a comprehensive evaluation of the strengths and weaknesses of Turkey's education system using national and international data. The report comprises of 6 main headings, which are governance and financing, access to education, teachers, education content, education environment, and education output. The report finds that although the budget of the Ministry of Education has recently been increased, it doesn't sufficiently contribute to the students' well-being, and that a further increase in the overall budget is essential. Moreover, the report finds that the ministry's expenditure contradicts with its principle of equality with regard to public and private schools. The report also finds that the percentage of preschool students attending community-based institutions affiliated with the Religious Affairs Directorate and municipalities has increased from 1.7% to 3.6% since last year. The net schooling rate in the 2016-2017 school year has increased by 2.7% in comparison with last year. Regional inequalities, however, remain a persistent issue. Compulsory religions classes, which are based on an exclusive Islamic curriculum, remain in violation of the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, the report has found. According to a report by the Turkish Parliament's Research Commission in 2015, the number of students per psychological counselor in schools was 538, falling below the necessary ratio. Moreover, the results of the OECD's Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, suggest that 15-year-old students in Turkey have underperformed in mathematics, sciences and reading.
Reporters Without Borders has nominated Mediascope TV for its 2017 Press Freedom Prize.
Reporters Without Borders has nominated Mediascope TV for its 2017 Press Freedom Prize. The prize will be awarded in collaboration with TV5 Monde in a ceremony in Strasbourg, France on November 7th. The ceremony will be part of the World Forum for Democracy, and the 3 nominees will receive prizes in the journalist, citizen journalist and media outlet categories. This year, a total of 18 nominees were chosen by the Reporters Without Borders staff on the basis of their professionalism, independence and commitment to media freedom. As Mediascope TV, we were also nominated under the Media Outlet category. The other nominees in the same category include Madame Masr from Egypt, Al Wasat from Bahrain, the Cambodia Daily from Cambodia, Radio Jupiter from Madagascar, Rio Doce from Mexico, and Revista Factum from El Salvador.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Akbank Jazz Festival, the most perennial jazz festival in Turkey, kicks off tonight with Vanessa Rubio Trio concert and will end on November 18th. The festival does not only host prominent jazz figures across the world, but also paves the way for emerging and promising next-generation artists like Nicola Cruz, Bonobo, and etc. The festival has now made it into a versatile organization by adopting panels, workshops, film screening sessions, concerts, and social responsibility projects. The concerts will be held at Zorlu Performance Arts Center, Babylon, Akbank Sanat, and Volkswagen Arena. The first film of the Phenomenon series, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, will be at Zorlu PSM tonight and tomorrow, accompanied by a live concert. For the first time in Istanbul, Orchestra Istanbul will perform music to an entire film from one of the most beloved film series in history. Cine Concerts and Warner Bros. Consumer Products announced the Harry Potter film concert series, a new global concert tour celebrating the Harry Potter films. Early last year and is scheduled to include hundreds of performances across more than 35 countries around the world through 2018. The 15th edition of Turkey's most important contemporary art event, the Istanbul Biennial, is on and will end in 10 days. The Biennial is created by the celebrated Scandinavian subversives Algren and Rakset.
İstanbul Kültür Sanat Vakfı'nın
And takes its
1987
theme, What Makes a Good Neighbor? Bringing together a variety of artworks dealing with different notions of home and neighborhood. The exhibitions are on at Istanbul Modern, Galata Greek Primary School, Art Kültür Pera Museum, An Artist Collective Studio, and Küçük Mustafa Paşa Amam.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.